Hello, everybody. I'd like to introduce you to our debate on what last mile delivery will look like in 2030. I'm very pleased and thankful. We've got some great panelists here to share their views on what we're going to look at. So we've got Rich Barrett, who was the Chief Information Officer for Parcel Monkey and is now part of the Parcels to Go organisation. Jamie Stevenson, who is the Chief Operating Officer for the Royal Mail Group, and Gary Winter, who's an expert in the sector and is a consultant with Quadient and has been there some time. So thank you very much, guys, for joining us today. We're going to go through a few things, including future visions and trends, sustainability and regulation, consumer expectations, AI, data and automation, out-of-home delivery, the challenges and opportunities. The first question we could ask is, which emerging technologies do you believe will be most significantly shape last mile delivery by 2030? So maybe we can start with you, Gary. What are your thoughts?
Well, obviously, I'm hideously biased because I work for alongside Quadient, who are a locker-based company. If I didn't say lockers, then I'd wonder why I'm here, if I'm honest. But the way the market is at the moment for the locker companies is incredibly active. So we've got Jamie here from Royal Mail. They've recently made a huge announcement about building a network of 20,000 lockers in the UK. My role is around the world for Quadient. So we see this activity being repeated in country after country after country. So there is absolutely a trend towards both postal operators and parcel carriers, logistics companies moving into the locker space to try to alleviate the huge cost of out-of-home delivery.
Okay, and what's your thoughts, Jamie?
Yeah, no, I would absolutely agree with Gary. I think that there's a generational shift coming our way as well in terms of use of out-of-home convenience solutions. I think UK specifically, I think, is a slightly later adopter than some of the other European countries from an out-of-home solution perspective, but absolutely by 2030, I think we will be looking at a very, very different network of out-of-home. I think one of the interesting questions will be, if you look at some of the other countries, Germany as an example, will that be carrier-specific locker networks that are around the UK, or will that be agnostic solutions? I know Germany is an example that they're struggling to get planning permission now for individual lockers, and they're asking for them to be generic, if you will, from a carrier point of view. I think outside or out of home, I think delivery methods vehicles and the way in which product is delivered either to out of home locations or to home is going to look very, very different in the future. Clearly, I think we'll talk about this probably in some more detail. Clearly, in some of the higher density urban areas, it's just not scalable to continue to put vans on the road. So I think we will see a significant change there. Whether autonomous vehicles will win through, I'm not so sure just at this stage. Maybe not by 2030, but I think delivery methods and vehicles will be the other key technology in the last month.
Yeah, because we're going to be covering off autonomous vehicles later on, so, and we'll ask that question. And Rich, obviously, are there any technologies that you see coming that are just not there that you see developing quickly? I know we've got artificial intelligence we'll probably talk about, but do you think there's maybe something that may come that we just haven't seen yet?
Yeah, look, I think there's kind of two phases here. I think there's the kind of short to medium term and then slightly longer term. And I agree with what Jamie and Gary have said. I think short term, there's tangible things that are happening right now, lockers being the obvious one. I think longer term, there are trials of, it's been going on for years, things like drones for more rural areas. You've got other trials such as like these shuttle delivery bus type things where they're almost like mobile locker stations and things like that. All of these things are slightly further out, but certainly in the short term, I think there's a push towards using lockers. We've certainly seen that from a consumer perspective, where people used to prefer a home collection or a home delivery. Now people in urban areas are, using these lockers as a preference because it builds on the whole convenience and control thing that consumers want now. But I think that also plays into the carriers' needs in the long run. You know, they're under pressure to deliver more parcels. They're under pressure to be sustainable. They're under pressure to push costs down. And these out-of-home solutions hit both of the consumer and carriers' needs. So, yeah, certainly I think that's the way things are moving.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And do we think drones or autonomous vehicles or robotics will be mainstream by 2030?
I don't know how mainstream it will be. I think certainly in fulfillment centers and in logistics hubs, you know, robots and automation are not a new thing in those worlds, right? They've been happening for years. It's expanding. It's getting bigger. Will we see robots and automation on the streets outside our homes by 2030? I think that's maybe a little bit ambitious. You know, there's a lot of regulatory and compliance hurdles that need to be thought about when you talk about that. You can't just suddenly stick a bunch of robots on the street running around posting things in people's letterboxes. But yeah, you know, cities and carriers are going to have to work together because, you know, delivery to home is only going to get bigger. It's just a matter of that final piece of the journey, how that happens.
So I'm completely in the anti-robot autonomous vehicle delivery camp. I think it's a solution dreamed up by middle-class people sat in centre parks in this kind of ideal world where there's nobody else on the road, everybody's nice to each other. I grew up on a terrible council estate, and I'm telling you now, if that thing had come down our street when I was 10 or 11 years old, it would not have made it to the end of the road without either being upside down, empty, or at least on fire. So this kind of halcyon idea that we're all going to be super respectful, even if whether it's got a Chinese takeaway in it, my auntie's gas bill, or a brand new iPhone, I'm opening up to have a look inside if I'm a ne'er-do-well. So I just don't see it becoming mainstream. And don't even start me on drones.
I think there's some things that are a little bit like that now, right? You've got like this concept, especially in the US, of, you know, doorstep pirates or whatever they call them. It is a problem, pirates. Right? Porch fires. That's what I'm looking for. Yeah, it's you know, it is a problem, but there's solutions that are out there. I think UPS have got a solution. I can't remember the name now. It's I want to call it door defense or something, where they're using AI and kind of more kind of demographic stats to decide if they're going to leave parcels in vulnerable places. But yeah, I think it's likely that the end result will be some kind of hybrid rather than the robot posting it through your door.
I think you're right, Rich.
I think Jamie?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we just witnessed the moment where AGV tipping was christened a new thing out in the streets. I agree with Gary. I think there are very, very limited use cases where that is going to be effective. I think the one thing I would say about robotics in general, and maybe not specifically in the last mile, but in the supply chain from a sort of posting parcels perspective. Employment markets are becoming more and more challenging, and therefore highly repetitive tasks are not attractive, particularly when they involve a lot of effort. And therefore, where robots can replace those repetitive strain-filling tasks, that feels like a smart thing to do. It's generally cheaper in the long run as well for operators, more reliable. They don't need holidays, all the other bits and pieces. But I think we will have to think about how automation/robotics can support the scaling of these last mile operations, whether it's in the middle mile in sort centers, etc., whether it's in depots for unloading, etc., whether it's all the way upstream in fulfillment, where it's, you know, goods in type activity, where you know, repeatable process and uniform shaped product can be picked up with various robotic arms now. So we probably will see and need to see an increase in those areas, David. But yeah, I agree with Gary. I don't think the roads will be awash with autonomous vehicles anytime soon.
No, that's very funny. And I've taken a bit of a risk here, but going back to drones, whilst I don't think they'll be, prevalent, do you think they'll be used more and more for, particularly for remote deliveries or remote areas to get to, almost like an airborne line haul vehicle for a small amount of volume? Do you think that's more practical, Jamie, particularly in what Royal Mail do?
Yeah, as you know, we use them for exactly that. They're much less susceptible to weather, etc. So when we've been dependent upon regular aircraft or indeed on boats and ferries in the past, that these do serve a lifeline to those remote communities. And I would say long may that continue. But payload is an issue, right? We are not talking about the ability to move 30 kilo large format parcels. This can serve a purpose, but it is quite a specific purpose. So I think we will see some, but I think Rich said it before. I don't think this becomes the mainstream delivery method. There's just too much regulation, too much safety risk involved. But for specific purposes, absolutely, yeah.
Great. Yeah. So yeah, that's great. Okay. So the next stage we're going to go on to is sustainability and regulation, which we've sort of hinted at already. And by 2030, do we believe that zero emission last mile deliveries can become the norm, or will it still become aspirational? Maybe we'll start off with you, Jamie, on this one, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. Look, we've gone big on our electric fleet so far. So we have, I think, I'm right in saying, still the largest electric fleet in the UK. I'm sure to be challenged soon, and we're very proud to do that. We are relatively unique, as you know, in terms of our delivery. We have many tens of thousands of boots on the street every day. So we are arguably a very green carrier. Try that with my teeth in, irrespective of the vehicle fleet. I mean, clearly, as that moves from last mile into middle mile, range and distances, etc., becomes challenging with a bigger kit. But certainly in the last mile, the technology is now at a point where it's reliable enough. I think challenges exist around the true cost of an electric vehicle over time versus the alternative, and some of the eye-watering costs when you happen to be the individual that needs to get the local substation upgraded to be able to get enough power to charge them, right? That becomes pretty painful. I've been putting costs to one side. I think our last mile fleets definitely will continue to progress. I think there needs to be a level of regulation around this, right? Because there is a distinct advantage from not doing it for as long as possible from a cost perspective. But we also find that from a customer perspective, as well as prospective large clients are reviewing options from a carrier partnership perspective, that green credentials play in much more than they ever did in the past. So that's a good thing, and we're proud to be able to say what we've done there. I think in some cities, I mean London obviously, but we'll see similar things in Edinburgh, we'll see it in Bristol, etc., where effectively exclusion zones will drive us towards different types of fleet in those areas very quickly.
Thank you. What are your thoughts on that, Gary?
I did. It's interesting you say about the infrastructure. That you always get the splashy headlines of 2,400 electric vans ordered or what have you. But it's interesting you do mention the background to that of having the infrastructure to sustain it. I did hear about a carrier last week that has withdrawn or parked up 2,400 electric vehicles because the cost of putting in the infrastructure and the availability of maintaining the charge and keeping everything flowing was just too much, and they kind of moved too early. So there are examples where, and I did 5 years at Royal, and I know how thorough the planning is, so I don't expect that to be an issue there. But other organisations aren't quite so adept at perhaps dealing with huge structural change at that scale. In terms of final mile delivery, in terms of what we're seeing, the first behaviour that changes isn't actually the last mile; it's first mile. Most of the carriers, particularly in the UK, are really good at home delivery. They've got some of the highest first-time delivery rates in the market in the world, in fact. So customers aren't necessarily trying to fix a problem, and their adoption of out-of-home delivery will be driven by either convenience or price. So at the moment, our lockers, most of what we see going into them is first mile. And that is the problem that lockers seem to be addressing is, I've got something I want to ship, I've sold it on Vinted or on Etsy or on eBay, I need to get it into the network, and lockers appeal to that generational shift that Rich mentioned earlier. In terms of getting customers to accept it for final mile, it will come down to, will carriers make it cheaper for out of home? And that will nudge some customers in that direction. And as you said before, in these urban areas where theft on the doorstep, the difficult delivery is pushing people in that direction. So over this 5-year period, I'll expect our overall volumes to go up going through the locker. But in that time, the mix changing as well, the proportion of last mile going into the locker increasing, and the relative share of first mile decreasing over the 5 years.
Yeah, good. And your thoughts on that, Rich?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting to get you two guys' perspective, actually, and it kind of aligns with my thinking on this. I'm not as close to a physical network as, say, Jamie, for instance, but if you look at the challenges involved, it's not difficult to see the infrastructure lagging behind the need here, and the government's pushing hard for the electrification of fleets and the electrification of even consumer-owned vehicles in the next kind of 10 years. That comes with a lot of challenges, right? And it's an interesting point about making huge bets on EVs, right? The technology is moving so quickly, even in the vehicles themselves, that, as you said, Jamie, the long-term ownership cost is yet to be established. And you can see this in the consumer EV market, right? You buy an EV 3 years ago, it's worth a fraction of what a new one is today with the evolution of the battery technology and things like that. I think perhaps there are things that could happen potentially with EVs themselves to make that more achievable. And, Gary's point around, being able to get these EVs around the routes and stuff like that, things like hot battery swapping and stuff like this is not currently possible or offered by anybody that I'm aware of. But the concept of being able to swap out batteries as opposed to having a battery that takes hours to charge. I think in the long run, you would hope that the shift to electrification might have economic benefits to carriers, right? If there are certain economic benefits to running EVs over traditional combustion engine vehicles, but I think we're probably somewhere away from that right now, and the infrastructure is playing catch up to make it possible. So yeah, it's definitely the way things are going, but there's a lot of challenges involved.
No, thank you. And particularly for you, Jamie, I think, how will last mile delivery evolve differently in urban centres as opposed to rural areas?
Yeah, I think the options in terms of method are much more varied in the urban centres. Whether it's an EV or a regular vehicle, for rural deliveries, you typically have that lower demand density. You've got higher interstop mileage, therefore you've got longer route distances in total. You're trying to get everything you can delivered on the same vehicle to avoid duplication, so it's typically a larger vehicle. I don't see that changing much. The switch might be from a normal combustion engine to an EV over time because the ranges are getting better and better all the time. I think the more interesting space is in the sort of urban and sort of super high density areas. I think local planning will have evolved to a point where it's just impossible to bring a vehicle into a large city like the centre of London, for example. It's already challenging. Almost all of our vehicles within the M25 are electric now for obvious reasons. But even just parking is more and more difficult with the bicycle lanes and all the other bits and pieces. And as a result of COVID, a lot of the pavements were widened and therefore the roads narrowed. It's just becoming progressively more difficult. So I think you move to a fleet of probably much more agile, much smaller micro electric vehicles over time, which have a completely different set of unit economics to them as well. And I think delivery frequency as well in those areas, when you combine this to the out of home network, I don't think this becomes a world in the future where we're delivering once a day. I think it's probably multiple waves during the day based on product being presented into our networks. I don't imagine it'll be too long before someone has the great idea to offer to become a groupage operator in some of these more difficult to operate locations. So you can imagine a depot that takes work in from a variety of carriers, has the capability of plugging into their back end and being able to persist delivery events, etc. That's not particularly new news, but it'll be interesting to see if some of the evolution in that space is, for example, Transport for London, it would be in a prime position to be able to offer that type of network in the central London. So it'd be interesting to see how it goes. But I think in summary, I would say you'll see different shapes and sizes of vehicles, different frequencies of deliveries in those urban areas where I think demand and consumer expectation is different to a lower density.
I think you're right, Jamie. If you look at our lockers, we've got 4 or 5 carriers connected to the lockers we have across the UK. That still means we've got 4 or 5 different deliveries, coming in there in 4 or 5 different collections, potentially 10 carrier visits per day in a locker that holds 40, 60, 80 parcels. To get the real density benefit, you would want somebody coming in the morning and filling it up and somebody coming at night and emptying it and going back to one of these consolidation points, as you described. It needs the carriers to play nicely and to sort of pick a winner, if you like, who's got the best reason to service a particular location. But the ultimate end game has to be that somebody acts on behalf of the others. Are you regretting the closure of the cute little train under London that could solve a lot of these congestion problems? That would be an ideal solution.
Indeed, it's been discussed many times. I think beyond economical return to service, I think would be the statement at the moment, Gary. But yeah, amazing when you think about that and how far ahead of its time it actually was.
I mean, if you could design a city now and put that in underneath, you had one underneath Bristol, underneath Edinburgh, as you described, what a phenomenal thing that would be, that you could steal a march on everybody and have this zero congestion, zero emission solution for moving bulk product around. It's incredible, really.
And it could feed directly into lockers, couldn't it? Underground.
Well, let's not get carried away, David. But yeah, it's I did have a very nice ride on it myself, which is why it came to mind.
No, but I think over time that will happen, and I've had conversations with, I'm not a locker expert, but different people with lockers, that they believe that lockers ultimately will, the infrastructure and space will disappear, and they'll become, some will become underground lockers that will feed up like a factory for people receiving goods. So I'm just adding 2 and 2, maybe make it 12. So
possible.
And in this slightly different question, Gary, and not necessarily just about UK, but the question was like, will 15-minute cities or low traffic neighbourhoods disrupt how goods are delivered? And I mean, delivered to the lockers. Are you finding any different trends around the world where maybe there is some consolidation, where someone's only allowed to go in once, or
Well, I think Jamie alluded to it earlier in Germany, where it's getting harder to get permission to place lockers, is that a lot of cities are seeing the row of 5 different lockers, the red one by the green one, by the blue one, by the orange one, by the yellow one, and just saying, look, this is ridiculous, and it's inefficient and unattractive. So I think we're going to see more cities start to bring in policies that says there'll be one locker, everybody will have to share it. It will be this color, and if you want to put a locker on the street, this is how it has to be. So we see micro bits of that. Like we have a relationship with Auchan supermarkets in France. They've got one locker provider, and if a carrier wants to have a locker at Auchan, they have to use the one that's already there and collaborate with us. So that is coming around the world, because it's getting harder and harder to find a location, and there are more and more organisations trying to do their own lockers. So if you just take the UK, you've got Every have just announced they're going to do their own lockers. Royal Mail have announced they're going to do their own lockers. InPost have been doing them for a long time, so have we. And then on top of that, you've got Yeep working alongside DPD doing their own lockers, et cetera, et cetera. So potentially, if a retailer or a supermarket decides they want to put a bit of space outside for a locker, they've got 4 or 5 organisations competing to put one there. And it's do they put 5 different lockers, or do they say no, pick a winner and everybody has to share? So I think that's going to be a trend over the next 5 years.
And probably from a locker's perspective, you probably get even better utilisation of those lockers, for the locker companies as well, won't you?
Well, this goes to the rural-urban debate as well. I mean, I think, in central London and, in dense urban locations, you probably could fill 5 individual lockers, but that starts to break down as you get to more rural. And putting a locker in a rural location just to support one carrier, considering how fragmented the market is now, Royal Mail's no longer dominant in the parcel space by any measure, to fill that locker up, you probably want to hedge your bets and have as many people feeding it as possible, and then it becomes the better convenient solution for consumers ultimately.
Thank you, appreciate that. The next thing we can talk about is how customer expectations will change by 2030. And sort of first question sort of asking is, will time, I've used the word time specific, it hasn't got to be that, become the new standard? So when are you going to get a delivery? Will you be told Will it be a half hour? Will it be an hour? Will it be something different? What are your thoughts? Maybe I'll start with you on this one, Rich.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I think that's definitely the way things are going. I mean, it's a generational thing, right? It's younger people in particular, they expect things very quickly. You know, Amazon have kind of conditioned them to expect things but the next day at the latest, really. And it all feeds into the same point and the things we've been talking about so far. This concept of kind of no longer delivering once per day, you know, there's places being replenished quickly, more decentralized fulfillment, you know, whether it be more fulfillment centers locally or using kind of old high street locations as like dark stores for local fulfillment. I think all these things are all leaning towards this concept of the consumer expecting their delivery very, very quickly and very conveniently. And so, yeah, going back to your question, I think it absolutely will become the expectation and the norm that people expect things quicker. The things that actually drive that will be partially, you know, the solutions that are available for that final mile, but also what happens further upstream. You know, that concept of predictive fulfillment and you know, the AI thing is driving a lot of that, making a lot of that easier and more possible. But yeah, I think it all kind of feeds into this need of real-time updates and very, very rapid delivery.
Good, and obviously with what you do, Jamie, you know, if this becomes a norm, you've probably got to be perceived, not you, but every carrier or distribution company's got to give what the customers want, but at a sensible price, which sometimes is a challenge. So how do you see the expectations going the same way as Rich described?
Yeah, I do. I think to be honest, the UK is generally pretty well served from a speed perspective. Almost every carrier will have a time definite option, whether that's kind of, you know, pre or PM, whatever it may be. I mean that in a world where the majority of your demand volume moves into a time definite arena, it's very, very painful from an efficiency and therefore a cost point of view. So that plays into a different pricing structure. If you move into a world, or imagine a world in the future where consumers can actually define the window they want something to be delivered in, so instead of, you know, the traditional, Rich, your parcel is going to be delivered between 2 and 3 this afternoon, which is window dressing on an optimized manifest basis, is nothing more than that. If Rich can now determine I want it between 2 and 3 this afternoon, that becomes really, really difficult. You're almost into kind of supermarket home delivery territory there, which has a different sort of unit economics. What is interesting though, and I don't disagree with Rich at all about customer expectation. I've been in this industry for 30 years now, and customer expectation has grown every single year in terms of what are the table stakes now, just to be able to have a conversation about providing service. I think we have provided. The collective industry provided great service to the UK, probably at its detriment now because nobody wants to pay for premium services. But equally, if you look at the recent trends of consumers buying from a lot of the Chinese exporters, so importers to the UK, they're also sensitive about price. So I think my answer would be it kind of depends. If it's a distress purchase, then absolutely the kind of dark store forward positioned inventory that Rich was talking about is where you can get things in 2 hours where you need to. But equally, if you're happy to pay a quarter of the price, you can wait 2 weeks and you can have it imported from China or wherever it may be into the UK and delivered. So I think it is very much a decision taken by the consumer based on the circumstances that face it too. But I think the key point is, as a carrier of our size in the UK, we have to be able to respond to both. It's not about backing one or the other horses. It's about creating choice.
I think Jamie's absolutely right. My personal view is you can divide the market in two, and half the market, well, part of the market is I want it now, and the rest of the market is I want it for nothing. And, you know, each of us is now thinking they know which one they are, and I am absolutely definitely, and I want it for nothing. So I will put up with all kinds of inconvenience to save a bit of money. Yeah, and if I can see a product and it's going to come from somewhere else, it might take 2 weeks, but it's half the price. I think most of the time, that's a sacrifice I'm willing to make. But there will be a trigger that I need something now, and then I'm interested in what time is it going to come tomorrow? What is it going to fit in between my team's calls and walking the dog or going to the dentist or whatever it happens to be? And that there are triggers that turn us from an I want it for nothing into an I want it now. And we are spoilt in the UK that there is an entire industry that supplies both. But my heart still sinks when I get the email saying, we have your parcel, it's coming for delivery. We'll be there between 7 a.m. and 9 p.m. Well, I'm not housebound, so how is that possibly convenient to me? So even this, you described it as window dressing, Jamie, that, it's going to be between 2 and 3. That normally is enough for me to be able to make a plan to deal with it if I want it badly enough. Otherwise, if I look at this, we'll come when we're ready, email, I don't even try to meet the driver or make it easy for him. I'll then let it fail if I have to, because it's not convenient to me.
Yeah, and if I say it's not in the direct logistics sectors like you guys and girls are, I think it's part of it will be an education to us consumers, saying, yes, Dave, you can have that, but it's going to cost you 5 times, or you get the cheap option, like you said, Gary. Yeah, and understanding, because if not, Jamie and Gary's businesses can't serve the customer at a price they're happy to pay. Because everyone sadly wants everything for nothing, and we have, in my opinion, been spoiled by the quality of service, reliability of service. We just take it for granted, and I can't see that decreasing. But
this is how Amazon's moved the dial. So previously, if you were going to buy something that was £100 and they said, and for £6 you can have it delivered tomorrow, most people kind of go, well, £6 on 100, that's not too bad. I'll pay the £6 to have it delivered tomorrow. You join Amazon Prime, you buy something for £1.99 and it's going to be delivered the following day. So if you try to go to another retailer and buy something for a few quid and they say, and you can have it tomorrow for £6, you're looking at like they're insane. So it's really distorted how people value this service, and it drives very, very eccentric consumer behavior. When you can almost get anything you want and it costs nothing for delivery, it's commoditized at the delivery and devalued a lot of the work that a lot of organizations have to put in to build these huge supply chains and get it done that efficiently.
No, that's good, and thanks. That's really interesting, guys. That bit. The next thing we'll talk about is AI, data, and automation. And we'll start off with you on this one, Rich. The question we're asking is, how will AI and data analytics transform routing, forecasting, and real-time deliveries from your perspective? Because I know you're thinking from an IT perspective, and then we'll get more operational. That's cool when we talk to Gary and Jamie. So, what's your thoughts on that, Rich?
Yeah, sure. So, the obvious application for, AI is a broad brush, right? You've got like the whole kind of large language model stuff that everybody thinks of as AI and what everybody talks about as AI. But there's the kind of historic, if you can call it that, branch of AI, which is like machine learning, which is, ultimately being able to predict things better than just a standard statistical model, right? And I think the first application of AI, if we use that as a broad term, is definitely around things like cost optimization. So the obvious one being routing, being able to take into account things like real-time traffic situations, weather, even potentially in the future, consumer kind of availability and things like this to avoid that whole failed delivery piece. That feels like a very tangible use of AI and actually achievable in the near to short term, really. I think longer term, Jamie talked earlier about kind of upstream uses of AI and in the robotic space, things like being able to stack a vehicle optimally and things like that. AI is able to do that more efficiently, faster and easier than a human. But I think generally AI kind of allows people to be more efficient, and that's a very broad term, a very broad way of describing it. But I think that transcends across, operations, planning, consumer behaviors, and things like that. So I think AI will probably just be one of the driving forces behind the other things we've already discussed today, and a driving force and an enabler.
Thank you, Rich. And Jamie and Gary?
So, yeah, I agree with Rich that I think sometimes AI is a misunderstood statement, or it's a very broad statement in terms of what does that mean? Will we see lots more automation in our world? Absolutely. Are there now technological solutions to things that we traditionally needed humans to do? If you think about our network, it's an enormously complex thing. We can now see all of our assets in motion, and therefore a machine can tell you, based on certain parameters or constraints business rules, if something moves outside of that, something's gone wrong, which means the humans can focus on doing things that humans do well, and then react to the exceptions that are flagged up by the machine learning capability. So I think we will use it. Better routing capabilities. Rich mentioned loading. One of the things in a last mile world that's particularly difficult is when a driver hasn't loaded their own vehicle. They have this wonderful ability to load 100 parcels onto a van and remember what color or size each one of them was, right? But if they haven't loaded that, it slows them down significantly from a delivery process point of view. So a number of carriers currently, Amazon do it, DPDHL are working on it. They use technology to be able to help the driver identify quickly where that particular parcel is in the back of the vehicle, which just helps reduce stop times, help drive efficiency, etc. And I think customer interaction is the other area where we'll get better. We all live our lives through apps. We all live our life through consumer preferences nowadays, right? How many times, to Gary's earlier point, how many times do you want to be told where your parcel is, how many stops away you are? Do I want to see it on a map, or do I literally only want to know when they're outside the front door? So customers being able to customize that experience and level of interaction with carriers across the planet, I think, is an important one, and retailers for that matter.
Yeah, definitely. I think we're meant to be discussing what the world will be like in 2030, and I think we'll have stopped talking about AI by 2030, and it will just be part of the bread and butter that sits behind the automation systems. It's a fascinating, trendy buzzword for now. We're all here old enough and long enough in the tooth to see how these sort of waves of description come and go. So I'm hoping that this will just be normal by then. We surveyed all our senior leadership on where they thought the biggest impact from AI would come in our business, and the number one answer by a mile was customer service. It was the ability to automate and deal with queries automatically and in a more reliable and robust way we've been able to in the past. So the kind of Wizmo, where's my order, type inquiries, all of those things with AI should be very, very easily and efficiently, quickly dealt with in a higher level of satisfaction. So I think that's where we'll see the customer impact from it. I think the days of going to an ops office and seeing Reg has gone to the loo and he's the one who knows where everything is on the whiteboard. Hopefully that is gone, and you've got far more robust planning and systems. And it's not that long ago. There's literally, I've seen parcel hubs with that approach to Christmas peak planning with trailers and so on. So I think all of that will just become normal. It's where you have relied in the past with people's knowledge and experience, and now that instead of that being trained in or being learnt by a person, it's going to be learnt by the machinery in the background, and that will make things smoother. But if I end my career and we've stopped talking about AI, then I will have seen that as a success. And drones as well. I'd like to stop talking about drones.
There is a pattern. We've worked that out. So.
Yeah, and autonomous vehicles. Don't talk about them either. Yeah.
Well, I've got a bet with. I've got a young colleague. Well, young. He's in his 40s, but a colleague who's working on, Quadient's potential interest in autonomous vehicles. When I speak about these are my personal views on autonomous vehicles, we've got a bet that I will stop work before I see a parcel delivered anywhere near me by an autonomous vehicle, and it's a bottle of rum is the wager, and I think my money is safe.
Interesting.
I think there's a few pragmatic things as well. Like, for example, we're all talking about it very specifically from the kind of logistics standpoint. I think there's other kind of interesting use cases for stuff like this. Returns is a major thing, right? People sending things back to retailers. I know it's always looked a bit naff when you do the kind of try it on online type thing where people can see what they look like with that hat on or with that t-shirt on. In the past that was pretty poor. It was essentially an overlaid image, right? Whereas now AI can do a much, much better job of that. And maybe that will just help to alleviate the pressure on things like, reverse logistics, the return stuff. And again, it does, we've talked about it already, but that consumer expectation piece, maybe some of the stuff that has been normal, like not having to pay for returns, will change as it becomes more difficult. So if we can alleviate that using clever solutions, then that's got to be a good thing.
Absolutely.
No.
Anything that drives around the volume of returns has got to be a good thing.
Yeah, definitely. The next question we've got is, what role will human couriers, or what will be the role of human couriers in 2030? And will automation replace, but more likely support it in some way, or will it be just as is now? What are your thoughts, Gary?
Well, I don't think 5 years is long enough for there to be a substantive change in the role of human couriers. To be honest with you, I think if you, I think Royal Mail had its 500th anniversary a few years ago, so you can see how long this industry has been around, with playing a vital role in every country's infrastructure. I don't see any of that suddenly stopping in a 5-year horizon. Hopefully, as Jamie described, the repetitive, mundane tasks that blight a lot of occupations will be reduced, and it'll be where and humans will be playing more of a role where they can actually add value. And when you've got a job where you feel like you're adding value, whether it's physically, mentally, or emotionally, these are far more rewarding things to do. And that stopping feeling like a robot, I think, is a really, really good target to have for the improvement of postal operators and couriers' lives over a 5-year horizon. But I think their role in supporting the industry will be not miraculously reduced or transformed in that timeline, would be my opinion.
And your thoughts on that, Jamie?
Yeah, absolutely agree. This is, I mean, you can automate some of those processes upstream, but this is ultimately a very labor-intensive operation. You can organize distribution networks in very different ways. You can have a very different range of quality delivery method, but ultimately you still need a pilot, as I would describe it, pointing whatever delivery method in the right direction. I think we must also remember as well, the UK has a fabulous delivery to door and collection from door capability, and one that we can be enormously proud of. And yes, out of home will develop to create convenience and drive efficiency and deal with environmental factors. But I still believe genuinely that we need to not lose sight of what customers want to interact with. And even if it's a courier or a driver you've never met before and you may never meet again, there's usually always a passing of some niceties, right, during that delivery transaction. I don't know if we're quite ready yet as a nation for all of those being delivered by robots. Yeah, I'm not quite sure. And I think there will come a point where there will be choice, right? If you think about as customer fulfillment has evolved over the years, and so Gary mentioned Prime as a kind of game changer, and absolutely, you can determine, do I want you to group everything in one box? Do I want multiple deliveries when my things become available? Customers effectively signing up to green products when they select a carrier. These are evolutions over the year. I think there's also going to be, at some point in the future, the potential there's a checkbox for, would you like this to be human, yes or no, at some point, right? So long way for us to go, definitely, but given the growth that we see as an industry year on year, I don't think there's enough automation out there to actually reduce the number of people we need. How we interact with them might be different, but I think this industry will continue to grow to the two-door or from-door solutions will still dominate over the out-of-home solutions for a long time to come.
Yeah, I mean, my only point to add, I think, is simply to kind of echo something that we've already talked about again, is that the humans will become the dealing with the exceptions that the machines can't, if you like. So, and that's an efficient way of using the technology, right? If you can use it to automate the donkey work, if you can use it to do stuff that it can do better than a human, things like customer service, where it's on 24/7 and can deal with those kind of basic Wizmo style queries, yeah, humans will still exist for the bits that only the humans can do. And I completely agree with everybody else's comments. It feels like that kind of very, very final mile piece where somebody has to hand the parcel over or put it in a locker or collect it from a locker, that's still going to involve a human.
Even though I'm paid by a locker company, everything other than a polite person handing me my parcel on the doorstep is compromise. That's first choice. You know, ideally at a time of my choosing, I get that, but handing me a parcel on my doorstep from a polite person is first choice. Everything else is compromise after that. Now, it's how much compromise am I willing to put up with, maybe for an economic saving or convenience in some other way, but that has to be first choice, and that means human beings are here to stay.